not simply a statement of who you are. I'm going to have you explain that in just a minute. Author of the new book, Pop Goes the Church, just spoke to a little less than 1,000 folks, talked about the big idea here at Whiteboard Sessions. Tell us what the big idea is, Tim, and then we'll find out a little more about you and your background.
You know, I just talked to the folks about leveraging the culture, and really, you know, Vince had a great session just before. It was a great, I like to call it a setup for my session, really.
Yes, that's why that's what he said.
He
said he was just there for you, man.
Good. And I mean, man, he just painted the picture so well of the people that we're trying to reach. And, you know, the church people tend to talk to church people. We're not reaching the community. And so I just talked about leveraging the culture in order to reach them, really talking a language that they talk, that they understand.
And you guys have kind of become known at Granger for, you know, pretty aggressive, pretty, you know, even in there, you could see some people, you know, saying, wow, that's really kind of out there for a lot of church people. Tell us why you work so hard to get so deep into culture.
I just see it as the only way we're going to reach the culture. You know, we've got people. I got people in my neighborhood that the church, as a traditional church, is not going to reach them. They don't talk that language. They don't understand that. They've got real issues. You know, I got a single mom on my street who's just, I mean, she's just trying to keep up with her kids. That's the best she can do. Another family, the mom just committed suicide. It's this dad now with these teenage kids, and they just got real life issues. And I just think if we don't speak their language, we're never going to reach them. They don't have any hope. And
it seems odd for a church like Granger to be the one doing that. Tell people a little about the history of Granger. And, you know, you hear all about these churches that are 5 years old doing this.
Yeah.
But Granger's been around a while.
Granger's, 22 years old, launched by Mark Beeson. He's our senior pastor, founding pastor, has been there the whole time. And he just really set a pattern from the early days. You know, back in 1986, it looked different, reaching the culture then. But really, the heart of that hasn't changed. We're just trying to figure out what it is that reaches the culture of the day and keep up with it. I think a lot of churches tend to, they get to a certain point and then they stop. You know, they got stuck in the 80s or they got stuck in the 90s or whatever, and they built a great crowd and they've got a great following, but they didn't keep up with it in order to keep reaching the community.
Constantly asking the questions, how do you engage culture where you are today?
Yeah.
And is that tell us about how that relates to Pop Goes Church, and tell us a little bit about, you know, go deeper. What are you trying? You're saying leverage the culture. Some people call it using bridges to the culture. You used Acts 17 as an example in there. Tell us a little bit about how that's lived out in North American culture today in churches.
Well, I mean, how we try to leverage it or live it out is just rather than pointing our finger at culture and saying, you know, here's something that's wrong or here's something you should stay away from, we find out what's good in culture, raise that to the surface, celebrate it. So, you know, it may be a secular song that's really highlighting, you know, maybe someone's deep loneliness. Well, I mean, that's a real hard issue. They may not have the right answers in the song. They probably don't. But they have the issue. And so, you know, we'll use the secular song towards the beginning of the service to kind of raise the issue. Then we'll talk through the Bible and what the Bible has to say about that issue. But it really gets everyone, like, in 3 minutes, really, they like, oh, yeah, I understand that. Or a TV clip. I just, in the session we just finished, I used some Desperate Housewives TV clips. Well, people have seen it, or they know about the show, or there's some connection there because of the medium of video that makes that connection for them.
Now, I'm guessing you would probably agree that in most cases, engaging culture is both a danger and an opportunity. You know, it's you know, Robertson McQuilkin, very well-known missiologist, said in every culture there are things we accept, there are things we adopt, there are things we reject, and then there are things we adapt. Where do you say, you know what, this would just not be somewhere we would go as a church. This might be somewhere we go as a church, we would change its use, but this is something we just accept wholeheartedly. How do you think that through at the church?
You know, there are ideas we come up with every week that we reject, that we throw out that just won't help us accomplish the mission.
On what basis?
Comfort level. We're looking at the end goal, the outcome. So, you know, we're trying to get people from point A to point B. We're trying to get them from a life without Christ to meeting Christ. And there are things that will help with that, and there are things that are just cute and fun, but they don't help us get to that point. And there are things that are cute and fun and crass or over the line. And the line's different, and, you know, it's subjective, and I understand that, but we just, as a leadership team, we're just trying to stay tuned into the Spirit, walk with God, and figure out where that line is and make those calls.
Have you gone over that line at all?
Sure we have.
Have you? What do you say to churches that never get near that line?
You know, it's a safe place to be. If you don't risk, it's a safe place to be. I think that you risk not accomplishing the mission, though. And in today's culture, there's so much noise out there that if we're going to get people's attention, we have to get their attention. You know, and if they're not there, if we didn't somehow get their attention to get them in the door, then they're not going to hear. They're not going to hear the gospel. They're not going to hear how much they matter to God, and then you don't have the chance to tell them.
You know, right now in evangelicalism, there's sort of a backlash against contextualization. One very well-known pastor said that contextualization would be anathema to the apostles. And you say you get their attention, and what pastors and people in that movement would say, you get their attention by lives lived in a holy way that then gains people attention. What about that? Why get their attention not just by holy lives, but also by engaging what's already their culture? Why do that? Why not just say, you know what, we'll live lives, people will see Christ, they'll come to Christ?
I think it's a both and, because I totally agree with the other side of that argument,
Yeah.
and I think it's possible to do both. I just think there are so many people that are not tuned in at all to the church world, the church culture. Yeah. They don't see any holy lives in their frame of reference. So we're not going to reach them unless we talk their language. And I talked in this session the example from Apostle Paul. You know, he went into this very important group of people. Sure. And he started out by talking about something, a secular icon that they were all familiar with, but he used that, and he didn't harp on him. It obviously disturbed him. He talked earlier in that passage. It says, he was very disturbing, all these idols. He didn't talk about that though. He celebrated the fact that they were seeking, that this icon pointed out they were searching for God. Then he just went on presenting the gospel.
Talk about culture. You're talking about engaging into their culture using bridges or leverage. I think it's term
leveraging the culture. Yeah.
You know, we've kind of created an evangelical subculture. You know, people read James Dobson to raise their kids and Dave Ramsey to balance their checkbook, and they listen to Christian music and read Tim LaHaye for their fiction.
Absolutely.
If we already have a culture that's a Christian evangelical subculture, and then there's a lost culture, how do you keep the people at Granger from becoming so trapped into the evangelical bubble that, you know, you can do all kinds of great things at church, but how ultimately are they to go out and tell the good news and be the incarnational witness that God calls them to be? How do you do that? How do you keep that bubble from forming at Granger?
You have to have people on your team that are tuned in. I don't know if it's a missionary or I don't know what it is, but people that are tuned in to the culture, and they don't reject the Christian subculture, but they can think outside of that. Yeah. You know, I think Stanley talks about in his book about insiders who listen to outsiders. Yeah. And who aren't just focused on the insiders, and that's a great analogy. And we're very intentional about having people on the team that listen to outsiders. They have that. They know. I mean, they remember what it was like not to know, not to have known Christ, and they're tuned into that, and they surround themselves not completely, but they have networks and relationships with people that are outside of the Christian subculture. Keeps them tuned in. You
showed a video in there of a local, I assume a local church pastor, who was speaking against your church. You did not blur his face. I'm guessing you've gotten some criticism. Two questions. How do you respond to it? And secondly, is there anything that you maybe have taken away from it that you've learned from it? So let's start with how do you respond to that? Do you get a lot, and how do you respond?
When there's criticism like that, you're talking about? You know what? I have learned a long time ago not to try to convince them to see it my way. Just love, just love on them, and you know, be aware. I don't want to do the same thing that they're doing. They're saying God cannot be working through your methods. I don't want to assume that God can't be working through their methods. I grew up in that kind of culture, and God saved me in that, and had His hand on me through that. I became very grounded in that. So I see some merits to that. I want to take it a step further, and help people, rather than just kind of build a little fence around their church and say we're not going to let the culture touch us, and we're not going to talk about it, and we're going to tell you everything that's wrong with it. I want to take down the fences and help people make that connection.
People say something critics can teach. Anything you've heard over the years, you say, you know what, maybe there's some validity, and I learned something from that. Anything on that journey?
Yeah, I've heard it said, look for the kernel of truth with your accusers. That when they say something, just everything that's not true, just let it go. But see if there's a kernel of truth in there. And sometimes there is. Sometimes it's the heart in which we came across. Sometimes our desire, our intention, never made it through. We intended to do this so we could accomplish this, and it just didn't work. We come up with that a lot.
Fair enough.
So